I think it goes back to that question of affirmation and literacy, right? Real is the opportunity to embrace this work in a way that is positive and affirming, as opposed to always being deficit ended, right? As opposed to always looking at problem, solution, problem, solution, right? I'm watching Real sort of happen in a way that allows people to look in a more, and again, for lack of another word, in a more positive, affirming kind of way.
Thank you for tuning into the Real Storytellers. This space was created to allow you to meet some real ones, those engaging in racial and social justice work, and to allow you to cultivate your own journey. These members are real, their stories are real, and their work is anchored in everything the Real movement represents. Welcome to the Real Storytellers. I'm your host, Angel Boobs. Today we have a special guest with us, Mr. Rich Woodson. Rich, would you please tell us who you are and or what you do?
Sure. Who am I? What do I do? So I currently work in the Professional Development Division at NJEA, where I'm coordinator of the Teacher Leader Academy, which is a new project that we started developing 4 or 5 years ago, came into fruition last year with our first cohort, and they've graduated, and we're starting with our second cohort. Been with NJEA for about 10 years. Before that, was a teacher for 30 years as a special education teacher, most of it in Audubon, which is a small town in Camden County in South Jersey. Usually my shorthand for identity, right, is gay, white, cisgender, male. It just kind of puts it in a nutshell, right? I live with my husband we've been married for 6 years. We've been together for 43 years. Actually met in college as education majors. So we're sort of tied to this work for a long time, right? He's now a retired college administrator. So living the life while we continue down this path. So probably the most important things to know. When I was a teacher, spent a lot of time doing good association work as well. Served as president, vice president. I think I had pretty much every job in the association except for treasurer and membership chair, because those take attention to detail in a way that doesn't interest me particularly. But that's, yeah.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing. I always say there's something special about special education teachers. It just takes a special heart to do that work, knowing all the challenges that come with that. But then again, we know there's challenges with all students. Mm-hmm. So kudos to you. And jumping into speaking more about your profession, when you were in the classroom, can you share a story about a time when you knew you wanted to be a professional educator?
So it's tied to special education in very specific ways. I have a sister who is just younger than I am, who is blind and developmentally disabled. And when we were growing up, she attended a day camp in our town for kids with special needs. So when I was in high school, my first job was as a counselor in that camp. And that really just kind of took me down that path and on that road. That the counselors and the kids there sort of became social group because they were my sister's friends and my friends. So we've all, and even to this day, we're sort of tied to those stories and that work together, my sister and I. But that was really the beginning down the path, and didn't take long to be like from the beginning of that work for me to look and say, gee, this would not be a bad way to make a living, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's an amazing story, because most of the educators that I know who went into special education, it's usually because they have a family member who was special needs, someone close to them who was, and so they can relate to that environment in a different way. And that's why I say that you guys are really special, because you just understand another group of people in a way that maybe others do not. And they need that. They need that relatability.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In your work as an educator, can you share a story about the moment that you became aware that racial equity is critical to our work?
So moment, no. It's funny. I grew up. I'm a child of the late '60s and early '70s, right? So I'm in 5th grade when Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy are assassinated, right? So I say to younger folks who I know, the Chicago 7 trial is historical drama on Netflix for some folks. For me, it was current events, right? So really grew up in a time where there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of conversation about race relations in a way that sort of disappeared during the 80s and 90s. And somehow that just always informed the work that I did. When I got to college, I went to College of New Jersey, Trenton State then. Ended up doing work at a homework clinic in a community center that's off the campus of Trenton State in what is a Black community. And that really became home away from home while I was there. I took, I was one of 2 white folks in a class in African-American history when I was in college, because I just saw that as important. I started teaching actually in Indiana, lived in the Midwest for 3 years after graduation. And there too, I taught in a town, it was the early 80s, taught in an auto industry town at a time when there was a huge recession in the auto industry. So there was about 25% unemployment in this town. And ended up in what was the inner city school in the community by choice. Some schools had closed and we had to sort of choose where we were going next, and sort of found that's where I wanted to be. And, so this is my 2nd or 3rd year teaching, and I was a resource center teacher in this room. There are 2 teachers on either side of me, both Black women, who I'd gotten to be friendly with. And at one point it was my turn to put up the bulletin board in the hallway, right? The shared bulletin board in the 4th and 5th grade hall, 4th, 5th, 6th grade hallway, right? And I always liked Langston Hughes as a poet, right? And particularly attracted to, there's a poem called Mother to Son. Begins with the line, "Life ain't been no crystal stair." Sometimes people think that's the title of the book. And it's really a message from a mother to her son on what it is to grow up to be Black and strong in America, right? And I took and very painstakingly sort of copied the poem onto large chart paper and made that the center of this bulletin board. So my 2 friends, Barbara and Carolyn, who were on either side of me, right? They ended up sort of gathering in my room, became sort of the center space. And they're having a conversation one day, and one of them says to the other, "So I didn't know that's what you were doing for the bulletin board this month." And she said, "I didn't put it up. I thought you put it up." And she's like, "I didn't put it up." "Well, if you didn't do it and I didn't do it," because they were the only Black teachers on the hall, "who put that poem up?" And I was like, "I did." And they were like, "You did?" And so it's just that the importance of kids seeing themselves, right? The importance of kids, even the district I taught in eventually was pretty much all white. But again, the importance for them to enter into a world that didn't look like the town where they lived, that has just, it has just always been an important part of the work for me. From the beginning. I don't know why, except that I like to say it's because I'm a child of the 70s, but that work has just always been important. So there isn't a particular moment, right? It just sort of evolves and grows.
Absolutely. Now, I admire you sharing that story. I resonated with it so much for various reasons, but we heard in the Teach Conference from 2 young ladies, Winona Volchi and Winona Guo and Priya Volchi. And we know that they're doing a lot of work centered around racial literacy, right? So when you spoke of taking a course and were one of 2 white males who was interested in taking a Black history course, it just made my heart smile because, number one, we really shouldn't even have a course on Black history.
Right.
History courses should be centered around teaching all history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to get away from separating different histories for cultures and just see history as history.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is you're even incorporating that poetry into your bulletin board, just show that you understood the need to connect with your students.
Yeah.
And that's all that was. It was simply saying, I believe that sharing this poem is going to connect me to my students in a way that they can resonate to really be able to understand their stories. And so your interest in this work is honestly just so admirable. And I appreciate you coming to this space to share your story with all of us. And I'm glad that we'll get to learn more about you in this time.
Yeah, California has done a really good job. They have a document. I'm afraid I don't remember what the title of the document is. They have taken their history, their social studies standards, and done a phenomenal job of integrating the places of Black voices, Latinx voices, particularly in California because they have such a large Latinx population, right? LGBT voices, the place of women in throughout American history. It's really, they've done this great job of like looking at their social studies standards all the way through K to 12 and finding those places. And it's all done in a really nice integrated document. It'd be great to see something like that in New Jersey that reflects the work that we do. And we need the resources to be able to do that, right? And think about our work from all voices, that inclusion, that intersectionality, and that's a common theme for me. It's just really important, I think, to be able to do.
Absolutely. And hopefully with our work through the Real Movement, we can move closer toward that. And so that leads me into the next question, which is, can you describe your relationship with the Real Movement?
So Gabe Tanglau and I are colleagues. He actually came, he first came to NJEA in a temporary position that was actually my seat while I was developing the Teacher Leader Academy. So from the time he came on, we kind of worked closely together, right? And have had a lot of conversations about, even as he was developing this concept of what real could be and what that could look like, right? There are conversations that we've had a lot of. So I sit on his staff advisory council, whatever that means. Actually, what it means is there's an opportunity to continue this conversation, right? Yeah. And in a more formal way, which is great because it makes sure that the conversation happens, right? I guess last year in the first initiation, the first cohort of the Teacher Leader Academy, that was not designed to be a virtual program, but like the rest of the world, right? We were sort of forced into that.
Right.
And in one of our modules, we have a specific emphasis on cultural competency, right? And how that works and what that means. And so I knew what that looked like in a real space, in a face-to-face space. I shouldn't say real space here, right? In a face-to-face space. But I wasn't sure how to do that in a virtual space, right? And so I thought, okay, Gabe is our go-to guy, right? So I reached out to Gabe and said, can we have a conversation about this? And what do you have for resources, or what can I make it look? What can I make this look like? And I started to talk to him about the topics that we wanted to cover and what we wanted to do. And he said, EK and I are just working on this idea for this thing that I think we're going to call Freestyle Fridays. And, this series of programs over the course of the summer. And when he started to talk about the topics that we're going to talk about, they were perfectly aligned with the TLA,
yes.
With the Teacher Leader Academy and what that was going to be. So it was like, okay, this is a no-brainer, right? We'll scratch the days that we were going to meet, and we'll have, folks from Teacher Leader Academy shift over to Reels. So even since then, we've tried to find different places where there's some intersection between the goals of Teacher Leader Academy and the Real Movement, and how we can have that, how we can make sure that the candidates are kind of integrated into this conversation that's going on. So those are a couple of places where we've, sort of intersected and are doing the work together.
Rich, that's amazing, because the more voices in the room, the more experiences in the room, the more rich the experience through Real. Mm-hmm. And I think that you guys collaborating and bringing various groups of people together has just made the real movement that much more enriching for people to be a part of. I personally, as a member and as a staff member, come into those spaces, and each time I'm able to take something away. So it's amazing that even the teachers with the Teacher Leader Academy, although they're there for the intent of earning those credits and getting that certificate, they're able to then also explore different things about just racial and social justice that are huge parts of their day-to-day work in the classrooms that people don't really realize is an issue, but the issues always come up. And so they're getting that additional training as well. So good to see you again.
And the flip side of that is, from the beginning of the Teacher Leader Academy, we have we've had a goal. We've been pretty intentional about trying to make sure that we attract candidates that look like the faces of all of our members, right? And so the side effect has been, okay, how do we cast a net in recruitment? How do we sort of let people know about the program in a way that's going to make sure that we've got a diverse student body in the Teacher Leader Academy? And so Real has been really helpful with that, actually. As that intersection has happened, we've got a couple of people in the second cohort who came to know about us through the Real.
We've
got a couple of people who have come to us through the Members of Color program, right? And I got to say, I'm just really proud. The second cohort is majority non-white. Actually, it's about 50% Black women, about 25% Latinx, and then the rest of the folks identify as white. So it's really been a nice way to build that relationship all the way around, I think, in a really important way.
That's amazing, because we know diversity in our union is important. We want everyone to be represented. And so having them in all facets of our union, including the Teacher Leader Academy, is extremely important. Yeah. Now, Rich, have you had one or more experiences with the Real that has challenged you or helped you to grow in some type of way?
So I don't know if challenge is the right word, but nourish, I guess, is the better word. The Freestyle Fridays, I think, really became nourishment, right? One piece that grew into something else that I think has been really important was the work of Terry Jess and Luke Michener out of Oregon on white aspiring anti-racist educators. And they've sort of built this framework for folks, and that has actually grown into I'm part of a staff team that's going through a pilot now of giving white educators an opportunity to sort of have some conversation about how to be aspiring anti-racist and what that looks like. And we're sort of using the videos, Terry Jess's videos, as sort of the centerpiece for the conversations that are happening with that. And I would not have had that grounding if it wasn't for Real. So became a pretty important sort of piece to continue the work in another way, right? And another tool to use.
That's amazing, because we know that a lot of the topics that come up as a part of Real are not easy topics for anyone to necessarily embark in having, but we know they're necessary conversations. And I think the Real has really provided us with a structure that allows people to have those conversations in a way where we're all respected and they can feel safe in really sharing their truths. And in sharing our truths, whether it's something that people want to hear or not, allows us to grow, because we learn from everyone's experiences, whether we necessarily agree with them or not, but there's always something we can take away from them and learn to make us better.
I think too that the language of racial equity, affirmation, and literacy, and somehow or another, really the Real spaces that I've been in have been very affirming, right? And like you said, they're difficult conversations. They're hard conversations for people to engage in. They're hard conversations to engage in with people who even more of a challenge, when you don't know folks and you're trying to sort of lay down your space, right? And sort of how you fit into this space. But there's something about the design, I think, of the way that those conversations have been designed that allow for that conversation. And I really do think that emphasis on kind of affirmation and literacy has been important, has been really important.
I agree, because it comes with a layer of understanding and a context in which we're looking at facts and we're looking to explore, which is all that it's about. It's about keeping it real and allowing us to grow together in this work.
Yeah. Very
Now,
much so.
in thinking of the future, Rich, what does that look like? How does the real movement influence that future?
So I mentioned sort of intersectionality before, and I just really believe that none of this work can be done in isolation, right? If all we are talking about is anti-Black racism, right? Or immigration, Latinx, and those issues, LGBT, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, anti-Semitism. Like, I think the challenge is really to hold in our heads that all of those things are connected, right?
They are.
White supremacist culture is going to attack all of those things, right? And be a danger to all of those communities, right? And it's a challenge. Because there are different times where we see the need for an emphasis on one of those rise up, right? But we all need to be doing that rising up. In this particular moment, we see, Asian American Pacific Islander, right? And the violence that's happening there. We all need to be ready to rise up and build that. But it also means that we've got a responsibility to make sure that when it's not just a question of danger, it's a question of how do we affirm and embrace the place of Asian American Pacific Islanders in our culture, and what do they bring to us? How do they enrich American culture, right? Pulse Nightclub is a time to sort of rise up and say, we've got to make sure that we fight against transphobia, homophobia, and LGBT violence is not okay. But at the same time, we've got to say, okay, the bigger picture is, what are the contributions that queer culture makes to the larger American culture, right? At immigration, we're at the border, right? We've seen that certainly in the last couple of years. A time to make sure that we make sure that discrimination and violence against brown people is not permissible. But once again, where is, how do they enrich the culture? Because that is the idea of America, right? And so I think that the challenge for Real going forward, and the opportunity for Real going forward, is to hold on to that big idea in our heads, and to move forward in that particular way. I would love to see that happen. And I see sparks of it in conversations in Real that I don't necessarily see in other places. So for me, that's the promise of Real, that we can build a platform where those conversations can be had.
Absolutely. And I agree with you with that promise that Real is providing. And intersectionality, as you said, is key. The bottom line is, so much division happens because of our differences. But the true bottom line is, we need to understand we are human first. Yep. And humanity should bond us in the fact that we should understand we are human. It doesn't matter what our differences are. We should respect each other simply because of that fact alone. And the sooner we all realize that, the better off all of us will be as a society.
When we compete in the oppression Olympics, right, white supremacy wins.
They do. And we all just need to come together and accept that we all have differences, and that there is no one ultimate culture or one ultimate race, and that we all just have to respect and accept each other. So absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah, and that there's incredible richness there. Like, that's the thing. It's I worry too about working out of sort of this deficit model of protecting against violence, which is certainly necessary, right? But at its core, it's around really valuing what people bring to the table. And what does the point of view of folks who have had a particular life experience, how does that enrich society for all of us, right? How does that lead to better decision making because we look at things from all different angles? How does it make life just more enjoyable because of all of the elements of culture, right? Music, dance, food, all of those things that just help us enjoy life, right? In a whole different kind of way.
There's beauty in differences. Without the differences, life would be boring.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
It would be.
Yeah.
Now, Rich, if you had to create a hashtag for your work, what would that hashtag be?
I don't know. No, I think, I think it's hashtag intersectionality, because that really is just, folks who know me well, I think may get a little bit tired of hearing me talk about that, but I just think it's the only way forward. It is the only way to be, I think it was Al Sharpton a couple of weeks ago. I heard him say, you can't fight hatred against anyone unless you are fighting hatred against everyone.
Absolutely.
So so hashtag intersectionality.
Now, Rich, in 1 minute or less, can you tell me why the Real movement is vital right now?
Why is it vital? So it's, as we come to understand the importance of racial, social, economic justice within the union space, right? And how much those really need to be connected to each other for so many reasons. I think Real is the opportunity to do that, right? The way that it weaves together members, staff, resources of the union at the state level, at the local level, all different levels. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when it flows outside of just a virtual space, right? And we can be face to face with one another, and what that's going to look like. But I think it's just a really vital part of moving our union forward around those issues of equity and affirmation, and particularly vital because it adds the literacy piece, and we are educators, right? So the union piece is important around equity and affirmation. The literacy piece is really important because we're educators, right? And we are a union of educators. And so we have a responsibility of sort of moving this conversation forward generationally, right? Connecting the stories and the experiences of the elders with the next generation to come. I mean, we are in a unique position to do that, right? And I think that Real gives us the tools and the opportunities to grow to be able to do that. I hope that was a minute.
It was, and I absolutely agree with you, because there is strength in our union. There's strength in all unions, but particularly in New Jersey, we know we are about 200,000 strong. And so in getting more and more people to understand how important this work is, we truly can make a difference, not only in the state, but we can make a difference in this country. We can sound that alarm off to hopefully have countries following that as well, just to get everybody on that equity train to understanding how important all of the work truly is.
Yep, definitely.
Wonderful. Now, Rich, do you have any final thoughts to share with the audience?
I don't think. I think that fills it up, right?
You did.
Thanks for sort of collecting these stories. I'm kind of curious about how they'll be woven together and what the opportunity is to sort of hear and share some of these, because there are just some really interesting folks, right, doing the work. And so I think collecting the stories is a really important piece of this. So thank you.
Absolutely. And all of the episodes will be forthcoming. And so the audience will be getting those very soon. Rich, I'd like to take this time to thank you for blessing us with your presence, your knowledge, your experience. We appreciate all that you do. And to learn more about the Real movement, visit our website, real.njea.org. And until next time, audience, peace.